Good evening and welcome to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny meeting on the 2nd of February 2023. It's now 7:01 p.m. and I'd like to start the meeting. I'd like to remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies? I think everyone's here, but...
Yeah, no apologies for absence tonight, Chair.
Thank you. And moving on to item 2, the minutes. I move that the minutes of the Corporate OLS Committee meeting held on 29th of November 2022 and the 8th of December 2022 are approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? I see no indication. Someone would like to second those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Carter. Those minutes are approved. Also, minutes from the Acela meeting held on the 15th of December 2022 are also included within the agenda for the committee's information. Are there any comments on the Acela minutes? I see no indication. Thank you. Item 3, items of urgent business. No items of urgent business have been received, but a briefing note regarding the assets disposal review and strategy update was circulated to members last week, and there should be hard copies available today. Does any member wish to comment on the briefing note? Councillor Kemp?
Yeah, the asset disposals briefing note. So this briefing note again refers to the Cabinet decision back in July last year, where a number of assets were put out for disposal. And my question is once again around the word disposal. We're now told that those assets come to around £100 million. But they include things like every scout hut in the borough, every village hall, every community hall, which at the time we were told there would be conversation between the groups that operate those and the council with a view to having them as some sort of community asset transfer. The council would then save the ongoing maintenance and the organisation would benefit by not paying rent. So, you know, a little win there for everyone. It seems to have morphed now into we're going to sell them all. So I'm just looking for some clarity over what the approach is going to be to things like village hall, scout halls.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think there's anyone to respond to your question, but we can certainly be recorded, and I agree we do need some clarity around the situation, so we can take that forward perhaps for a future meeting. But is there anyone else wish to comment on the briefing note? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 5, the draft General Fund Budget 2023/24 and medium-term financial strategy update. Can I please ask Jonathan Wilson to present the report? Sorry, I do apologise. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest to make? I see no indication. Thank you. Item 5, draft General Fund Budget 2023/24 and medium-term financial strategy update. It's been tabled for members. Can I please ask Jonathan Wilson to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report, as is stated, is the budget and medium-term financial strategy, and normally that gives us quite a firm indication of where the council's finances are heading for the forthcoming year and beyond. But this report is very much a point-in-time report that reflects the context of what we brought through to the committee in Q2 and the financial position reported at that point, and the requirement for exceptional support. It's reflecting the subsequent impact of the Section 114 notice, and consequently we're bringing to this committee a budget position that has in itself some moving parts potentially, and subsequent to the meeting will inevitably through the year require a reassessment of position and therefore revision to the budget. And I'll come on to that shortly. The exceptional support request, as we set out at Q2, was around the 184 million mark. In Appendix 1, we've got the revised MTFS, and it's 182.5 million is the bottom line figure. So that's following further extensive assessment of the budget requirements for 23-4. And that MTFS obviously brings together all the elements that this report talks through. So we consider our increase in net resources through council tax, business rates and government grant. We look at our inflationary pressures and growth. And as noted in previous discussions on the MTFS, just taking those three together, our funding is not covering our increasing costs and inflationary pressures. And that's for a number of reasons. One is inflation itself. That is impacting us across a range of areas, whether it's pay, whether it's the cost of adult social care provision, whether it's fuel and energy costs. And then alongside that, we have, unfortunately, what we call the normal growth pressures, but particular growth pressures in adults and children's, not just expected in the forthcoming year, but coming through from the previous year, and a recognition that attached back, as we've talked about previously, to those one-off measures that we had to take to support the existing budget. So it's really important to remember that we've got significant figures at the bottom that are predominantly the driver for a 182 million gap. In fact, they together come to 160 of that 180 million. However, that still leaves an underlying operational deficit on the budget of nearly 20 million. And that's with savings of over 8 million that have been through a short, rigorous process to assess deliverability, which we'll then come on to shortly. But we, as a council, like many councils, operationally were facing significant problems last year, the year before, and has come to fruition alongside the wider issues of investments. So it's really important to consider that together, but nevertheless, we need to also focus on that exceptional support, and that attaches specifically to those wider impacts of investments. The report itself, we are in a position, or me personally, I'm in a position where I will have to issue a Section 25 statement on the robustness of this budget and the adequacy of reserves. And as it stands today, we haven't got indicative support from government, but we've got a quantum that attaches to that. And we haven't, as we'll go on to see in the report, got a final decision on whether the council has flexibility to increase its council tax level beyond referendum limits. As it stands today, we have not got that flexibility, and this report reflects the expectation that Cabinet would support up to the referendum limit at 4.99%. So therefore, within this budget, we are asking you to comment on a budget that has effectively, the ground is shifting under it to some extent. We need certainty from government. We're not reliant on ourselves to make these ultimate decisions yet. And for me personally, I cannot issue that statement without further context and information from government. Nevertheless, it's important to also say that all those discussions are ongoing. They are well progressed. We've reached a point with those discussions, though, where it's outside our control, and we are having to navigate the consequences of that in terms of reporting to you as members and ultimately reporting on to Cabinet and Council, where this will come back to you. I wish we could give more certainty on that, but we can't. We are waiting for that response. We hope to have a response on council tax, which inevitably then adjusts the exceptional support number if there was any flexibility to go higher. And we will bring that through to the relevant forums, and you will hopefully, well, you will have to see the outcome of that by council. So in that context, we still are presenting the wider position on all of the service budgets, the savings, the assessment of inflation, the wider impacts of Treasury, which are the figures that won't change in this mix. Essentially, any change is linked between two figures. If council tax goes up, exceptional support goes down. That would be the amendment we would have to make. And just for members' benefit, broadly 1% additional council tax is around about £750,000. So we will navigate through to that point. So section 3 of this report sets out my assurance statement and considers this wider position. It also considers the context we're in of the directions, and later on the agenda we've got both Treasury and Capital coming to the committee, and we were asked as part of the directions to develop new capital and Treasury management strategies, which are on the agenda. We've got a plan to reduce debt, but to date that's not impacting yet on our budget because the plan is there in outline form but needs to be developed. Actions have been taken, but the fruition of asset sales haven't happened yet. But the plan is there to deliver the reduction in debt, and as it stands today you can see the impact of that not having happened yet. So we've got significant interest costs of over 28 million in the budget. We've got a loss of investment income of 34 million, and we've got a combined MRP charge and the interest attached to capitalisation of £100 million. The MRP will reduce when the investments are sold, and that strategy remains critical to doing our part in getting to a financially sustainable position. But inevitably, the report goes on to allude to, we don't, in the longer term, as things stand today, reach a position where we can resolve as a council our own financial issues. We can make significant progress in terms of divestment of investments and asset reductions to support that, but we can't get to a point where we don't need ongoing capitalisation support from government as it stands. And we have shared that position with government, and that position is understood in its current form, and we will continue to evolve those plans and discussions with government, but that will go on into the new year, and we expect therefore we will need that indicative support to set the budget to enable that discussion to continue. The budget therefore can only be delivered with this support, and the 25 statement essentially asked me to examine the proposals, consider reserves, and consider therefore all the aspects that come together to the bottom line of this MTFS and budget. And we are making some decisions around creation of reserves to support the transformation of the organisation, the delivery of savings, which are still equally not moving, they're broadly agreed in principle, but are subject still to approval by Cabinet, and come to an assessment, therefore, of whether our budget is adequate. And it's hard to say that's the case in this context, but what we can say is there is an ability to deliver transformation with the reserves we put aside, as long as the exceptional support is forthcoming. And that's the only context we can issue the Section 25 statement in, or I can issue the Section 25. And therefore it's important that members understand that before it goes on its journey through to Cabinet and Council, where we will inevitably have to make the same point to all members. The savings programme itself is, again, we've had to respond in short order to demonstrate the Council is taking action to solve its financial problems. We have developed, alongside the savings programme, a robust delivery risk assessment process. So we've not just got the savings, but we've got a mechanism to monitor and support the delivery of them. And that's led by the corporate transformation team. That system is in place, that's been informed by Commissioner input and is up and running. What it's also fair to say, though, is that in the timescale, there were a range of additional potential savings, which there wasn't time to scope fully and develop the business cases attached to them. And that work continues, and that would be part of bringing a revised budget options through to members throughout the year. The reserve levels we end up with at the end of this year and start therefore next year with will inevitably be broadly our general fund reserve at the moment. We would expect support, even if it's allocated back into previous years when we work through the financial accounting of this, to still be on the understanding that we require a general level of reserves to enable action to be taken as required to support operational delivery. As I said, we will move then into a position where we are more broadly delivering an improvement and recovery plan that requires significant transformation and resource. We therefore need to support that delivery with reserves to enable that transformation to happen and to build on the short-term capacity needs that we will require to create a short-term focus on the delivery of that plan, which inevitably addresses the issues from intervention, but more broadly the issues from the BVI inspection that's still to be released in terms of the report. We're hopeful that we have all the directions that we will receive, but we don't know that yet for certain because the issue of new instructions last week, did incorporate interim findings from the BVI report. But nevertheless, the report itself is still to come, and we need to consider that, and currently that's expected in late February. But nevertheless, there's still those moving parts alongside everything else. But we are trying to set a budget, therefore, that is moving to financial sustainability and delivering transformation and funding intervention and recovery in parallel. And that is what we've set out in the MTFS in summary, and is what is set out in more detail within the report. The final thing I'll say as a starting point, and we can come to detail as required by members, is just to note the statement from the commissioners themselves. So the commissioners note, obviously, this budget can only be balanced with exceptional support. They also comment on progress since the intervention, and also note some further actions. I've mentioned savings. There will be a further full review of fees and charges. There'll be a review of the capital programme and the pay policy. So there's essentially all key decisions need to be considered in their financial context. The position on directions is broadly as I've set out, and they reference specifically that piece of work where we've looked at the longer term, medium term plan, and they also note that we've created the compliant treasury management strategy. So hopefully you can see they're reflecting progress against the directions. They're recognising the progress more broadly across the budget to understand the requirements we need and to support the delivery of the extremely challenging improvement recovery plan. And we continue to work on all of these things in parallel as we progress. So as a committee, inevitably you will see more reporting on the budget progress as we go through. The remainder of the budget then goes into more detail on the items within the MTFS and gives some wider context, particularly around council tax, and I'll just pause on that quickly. We've included the comparator group to just give members the context for discussions with government, because we are in our comparator peer group at the bottom end of that scale, and on the assumption that all authorities raise their council tax to referendum limits, we will obviously remain there unless further action was taken. Obviously that reflects a history of decision making across councils, it does at all councils, but also broadly it to some extent links to the investment strategy itself in specific years. So that is useful context for the conversation with government, but nevertheless is merely a reflection of those decisions that were made by elected members in relevant years. And finally, I was just going to touch on some of the risks. And the risks are really broadly back to where we started. It's the moving parts in this jigsaw of the budget. And the moving parts remain delivery of savings, inflationary pressures, ability to divest of assets at the speed we hope to do so, the wider interest costs attaching to our underlying borrowing, and really just summarise the need to take all those actions to address the underlying financial issues attaching to the investment strategy, but also to enable transformation. And then alongside that, consider our ongoing spend, which are panels that have been convened on the back of the Section 114 notice, enable us to do. And I'll stop there, Chair, for comment and question.
Thank you, Jonathan. Could you walk us through how the figures changed from 184 million to 182 million?
Sure. So, inevitably, as we've gone through this process, we're creating assumptions around positions at points in time. One specific section of that that's moved on that is the savings themselves. So we had an outline level of savings that were created right at the start of the year. That then, obviously, the focus on that completely changed midway through the year. And as we created the delivery risk assessment process, we wanted to make sure for members we went through a robust process so that we had deliverable savings that were now relevant for our circumstance. So they were completely reassessed, and there is a wider set of savings that are also available but haven't yet gone through that process. So we would hope that that figure will come down further from the 184. So that's part of it. The other thing, the key thing that happens in every year of a government cycle is the finance settlement itself. So our funding assumptions move with the settlement. So the settlement will ultimately then tell us what our expected income is for the forthcoming year. Alongside that, there's potential movement in all the numbers there. Inflationary factors are moving. Pay discussions are going on both nationally and locally, and we've got an indicative 4% pay for 23-4. But within that budget figure, we've also got the impact from the NJC award for 22-3, which was additional to our existing 22-3 budget. And then, broadly, the other thing that moves and is impacting on this and is being reassessed is interest cost. So interest cost has fluctuated, and we are adjusting with fluctuations to adjust those expected figures in future years. Obviously, the significant piece of work that underpinned this was that assessment for government, where we rebuilt the MTFS and reassessed assumptions, and that has then evolved into, ultimately, our budget.
Okay, thank you. Can I open up to members' questions? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Jonathan. You mentioned that Cabinet members had identified the cuts and just needed to sign them off now. And I guess from our residents' point of view, they will want to know the detail within that and what specifically services are impacted. We see here some obviously broad, large kind of budget envelope savings and cuts, but obviously it's the detail that we need. But when will we see what this is so that we can speak to our residents and tell them what this really means? Will it be coming back to this committee, other committees, and a time frame on that, please?
So initially it will go through to Cabinet for approval, and the detail will be through to Cabinet. There's no preference. We can bring things back to the committee as required by the committee. Obviously, the Cabinet Council process sets the budget, so we're in very short timescales. But I'm perfectly flexible to bring back as required, and we may be in a situation where our timescales overall on the budget move. If we don't get clarification formally on council tax levels, for example, we could be in a situation where the ultimate council date is more flexible than it currently is. So I'm happy to take offline with Lucy and seek member comment if members would like further detail on that, and happy to come back when that detail is available.
Councillor Kent.
Thanks, Chair. Questions now, comment and debate later. Okay. So if I start then with savings, what we're told in the report is that savings programme underpinned by a delivery risk assessment process which addresses issues identified in respect of delivery of savings in 22-23. I think we've missed the target by 2.5 million for the current year. I am absolutely certain that if I'd have read council document for setting the budget for this year, I'd have been told that the savings process was robust and there was a risk assessment, etc., etc. So tell me what's going to be different this year to last. Why should we believe that we're actually going to deliver these savings this year when we couldn't deliver them last year? And kind of second to that, you know, once again, we use the phrase savings when there's a lot there which is income generation. We failed the income generation last year as we failed it the year before and the year before and the year before. Tell me why you actually believe we're going to get that extra income in next year when we've never done it before.
So on the savings and on the delivery risk assessment, so currently the process sits with the directorates to deliver their savings. They propose their savings and monitor their savings and come back with the outcomes to that. The process this year is to, the savings are still proposed by the directorates, but the savings are then put into the delivery risk assessment. And the idea of the delivery risk assessment is that it's a forum for the corporate transformation team to challenge monthly throughout the year on the delivery of those savings and understand and take action to address non-delivery as required. That corporate transformation process is not sat on top of the delivery process, and partly the non-delivery of those savings is driving the need for that process. We've also worked with commissioners on the process to ensure it works in parallel with their experiences to date, but to adapt it obviously for the nature of Thurrock. The process itself is up and running, the savings are there. The timescale we've had this year is difficult in terms of short order, so therefore the level of savings is not perhaps at the level it may have otherwise been, but there is therefore a process to come back and revisit that. The corporate assessment of that means the burden on finance, who tended to pick up issues retrospectively, is significantly lowered. So the process then means that the finance team are informed when action is required at a much earlier stage, and action can be taken and addressed to aim at delivering those savings or delivering alternatives as required. So I think, certainly from my perspective in corporate finance, we welcome this change and we do consider that it's significantly more robust.
Jonathan, thanks for that. In there, you use the phrase, the savings are there. If the savings are there, why won't we be able to see them this evening? It would have been really, very helpful to see them. Secondly, if I can move on, Section 5.4 lists a number of key ambitions. I think that's the first time we've seen those key ambitions. So can you tell me where they came from and how they were arrived at, please? Who owns those key ambitions? And I guess for me, the final one, accepting everything you've said, I think we all understand that this is fast-moving, lots of moving parts, and incredibly complicated. If Cabinet is going to be setting a budget on, or recommending a budget on the 15th, that means papers need to be out next Tuesday. That meeting's already been delayed by a week. I'd like nothing to be cast in stone. Are you going to hit that deadline? And is the budget setting council meeting going to go ahead on the 22nd of this month?
So if I start with where you finished there, Councillor, we will be ready as officers to produce the reports for the 15th. What we can't control are those conversations with government that ultimately enable Cabinet to come to a recommendation. And so we need to be mindful of that ongoing conversation between ultimately Cabinet, ourselves and government to enable them as a group to be able to take a decision in the context that should be taken, and therefore enable you as councillors at council to have a appropriate recommendation to the council members. So we can't give complete certainty because obviously it's outside to some extent of all of our control, because we are waiting for discussions with government to not to conclude even. The discussions concluded, the outcome is being considered, I think is the best way to put it. And they will need to notify us as a council of that. To come back to the themes that you mentioned in section 5.4, so they are the themes broadly that underpin our improvement recovery plan. And the themes in the improvement recovery plan all have SROs, so senior responsible officers. Broadly, they're the directors of the organisation, and they are reporting back through the Improvement Recovery Board. The Improvement Recovery Plan itself, they're very much the intention is to bring that to all councillors as quickly as possible through discussion at the IRB itself. And obviously that's something that's being navigated with commissioners, but we certainly expect that to happen certainly relatively soon, being the only thing outstanding remains the BVI reports. So I think that answered all your questions, Councillor. But
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions from members? Jonathan, I've got one. You mentioned the investments and the sale of them would impact the MTFS. I know timescales can vary wildly on this, but are we talking 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years as a rough indication?
So when we come on to the when we come on to the Treasury Management Strategy, there's a table within there that sets out the proposed timescales as we can project them at the moment, and it's very much as we can project them. But what I can say is the largest of those investments, the solar investment, is inside the administration process, and work continues to enable that to get to a position where it's sold. We know within that process they've assigned a team to enable that, and that's running in parallel with the wider administration. So as soon as they have sufficient clarity around ownership and the status of creditors, etc., and they are in a position to sell the asset, that process will happen inside administration. Obviously that on our balance sheet is 65% of our entire portfolio. So that one sale in itself is absolutely critical to the release of funds back to the council.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Kent.
Just picking up on that, Jonathan, you spoke of creditors in the plural. I think that what we were told previously was that the council was the only creditor.
So, sorry, I referenced that just in the sense that they have to make that assessment of all creditors as a broad term. We still expect to be the only creditor, and we have no indication that anything else to the contrary has happened. Yeah.
Any further questions? Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Just going back to page 7, 5.1. It says the S151 officer is required to make a statement on the adequacy of reserves and the robustness of the budget. I mean, knowing what we know now, does that mean between 2018 and 2022 the statements were inaccurate and misleading?
So what I would say is the statements were made based on the set of assumptions underpinning the budget at the time. Obviously, if the assumptions were the assumptions we are using to construct this budget, that would not have been a statement you could have made. You couldn't have said there was an adequate budget and reserves, because inevitably you would have had the correct valuation of investments, and you would have had an MRP policy we've got an MRP charge for this year of 75 million. So there would have been broadly a £75 million hole in that budget as well, equivalently. So you wouldn't have been making that statement with the policies we've got. With the assumptions they had at the time, created a different set of figures, and were therefore those statements were made in that context.
And then, sorry, and then just coming, it's back on page 6, 3.8. Really, it's just a comment, really. Am I correct in saying that we wouldn't be the only council in difficulties if these grants were discontinued?
Yeah, that's so going back to our starting point with the MTFS, there's that 20 million gap broadly that we're experiencing beyond the investment impacts. That situation is across. I think it's fair to say there's. If I attend a wider group meeting for unitary councils, for instance, there's always a level of concern. That level of concern, I'd say, is heightened this year. It doesn't always mean it translates into councils seeking further support from government, but my understanding is there's wider discussions of that nature, and sometimes it's flagging the issue to government as part of that conversation, but nevertheless, inevitably inflationary pressures and interest costs will have affected all councils. Growth pressures, if you're a unitary or a county, on social care will affect all councils. So everyone is managing their budgets, and broadly it's a difficult job to manage at most councils currently.
Before we move on to comment and debate, is there any other member questions? Any member wish to comment on the report? Councillor Kent.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's kind of four areas. The first is just to recognise the kind of work that officers are putting in when this is something that changes so quickly, when things are moving very, very fast, and when you've got the complexity of having officers trying to come up with kind of recommendations, elected members over here trying to juggle political imperative against balancing the books, the commissioners sitting over there kind of keeping a watching eye on it and trying to pull it together, and then government in the background taking their time about whether or not they're going to come through with the ask. So I think the first thing is to kind of accept just how complicated, difficult it is, and to kind of say that I think we all understand that. The second for me is the long-term problem. We know that the council is bankrupt. We know that there is a massive debt. We know that we're not going to be able to set a balanced budget without government help for at least the next 6 years. And then when we get to year 6, actually things start to get worse again because of the accumulated borrowing over that first 6 years to just be able to set a budget. So, a really grim situation. The third then for me is that £20 million underlying operating deficit, and it's that deficit that has been allowed to build up because we were relying too heavily on investment income rather than right-sizing the council as we went along. We didn't use that money as a buffer to do the right thing. We allowed it to kind of hide the problem. And I'm just kind of really concerned that we're told in here we are, here are the savings package, here are the aims, but hidden away, it should be emphasised that further savings and organisational transformation will be required in year 2022, 23, 24, and beyond to address the gravity of the council's financial position. So, this isn't necessarily as bad as it gets. There may well be worse to come. And it's just interesting looking at those key ambitions. And if I go through them, to agree and embed a new vision, values, culture across all levels of the organisation and between officers and members based on openness, transparency and accountability. I just struggle to see how this organisation, operating as it has for the last 5 or 6 years, is going to be able to, how it's going to be able to pull off this kind of handbrake turn that is going to allow that to happen. I'm just struggling to see how that's going to happen. Achieve financial sustainability as quickly as possible, and again, nobody would disagree with that at all. It's a real priority, but at what cost to residents? What services are residents going to lose? I look at Councillor Abbas, the theatre, libraries, the museum, all likely to go. Dirtier streets, fewer bin collections, just to name a few. There has to be that balance. What cost to residents will that be done? And reducing services available at the same time as making people pay as much as we can possibly wring out of them for the privilege, and that clearly gives me, and I think gives all of us, a real problem. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but just go on to the last, which is to capitalise on Thurrock's growth opportunities, facilitating more and directly delivering less. I just don't think that is what should be an ambition. That doesn't show any level of ambition at all, and I kind of really regret it. It's not a situation that any of us would want to be in, but I just don't. I am struggling to see the kind of glint of optimism and the hope for the future, and I'd just like somebody to be able to give it to me, really.
So thank you, Councillor, and appreciate the comments and the context. I think all we can say at the moment is we are responding to a set of directions from the Secretary of State. The key focus of those directions in the first instance is to address core financial issues. That's where our focus has been very much in the last quarter of last year and ongoing. The requirements of the 114 notice are quite strict in terms of the definition of what can be spent, and that plays into the comments that you're making. And to some extent, while solutions are sought with government, we have to ensure we're complying with both the directions and the requirements of the 114. And that is inevitably leading to the nature of the comments you've made. And as officers, we obviously have to follow and pursue that in conjunction with commissioners. That doesn't mean there isn't consideration of residents, but I think that it's fair to say the focus in the first instance has been to understand the financial problem, and the conversation about the resolution of that problem ultimately has only just begun with government. But it is reasonable. I can only point to one or two examples, but the one I would point to in the first instance is that when there is a conversation about council tax and potential changes to council tax flexibility, there in parallel is a conversation about how to mitigate the impacts of that to the most vulnerable residents in whether it's our borough or other boroughs affected. So there is some recognition of that. There's also, obviously, within the 114 itself, some direct recognition of the need to support vulnerable residents. So there's some specific references to the wider resident impact, but I would tend to agree with you that the focus of the directions to date is predominantly around finance, and the 114 is very specific about how you manage that. The improvement recovery plan more broadly is aimed at ultimately providing higher quality services to residents to address some of the wider issues that will inevitably come from the intervention and findings. But in the context of a 114 and the wider financial directions, that's something we are navigating, and again, your comments are not unreasonable in terms of how we've approached that journey to date necessarily. So I think it's an ongoing conversation for members. It's an ongoing conversation definitely with government, and wider, you know, at central government. It's definitely a concern. All our conversations at the moment are around financial sustainability predominantly, but just to give some assurance that that's not the only consideration. And that's probably all I can say at this point.
Any other member? Okay, we'll move then to the recommendations. So the ones that were comment, I invite members to comment. 1.1, any comment from members? Recommendation 1.1. No. Okay, 1.2. That we've noted, and that's done. 1.3, that the committee supports a 2% adult social care percent increase. Is that agreed? Agreed, yes. I'll take probably 1.4 through to 1.10, unless any member wishes to bring up one of those points on block, so they're all to note. Is that agreed, the 1.4 through to 1.10? 1.11, the committee comment on the draft budget proposal. Any member wants to comment on 1.11? No.
I think we have commented, but I think the comment that I would kind of underscore is that as this is a kind of an organic process, that for this year, set the budget on 22nd of February, that's it, close it, put it to bed, done. That's not going to be the same this year, that there will be savings coming forward in year. Things are likely to be changed. So just that kind of assurance that any material change will come back here and go to the relevant scrutiny committee before decisions are made. That would be my comment.
I would agree with that, Councillor Kent. I think we touched on it earlier, but I think it's good to add it in there at that point. So thank you for that. 1.12, the committee note again. I agree the committee has noted. 1.13, the committee note again. And 1.14, I'll read this one out as it's the last one. That work on the budget will continue through 2023/23. Is that correct? Is it in 23/23? Is that a typo? Typo. Yeah, I thought so. With more savings required to council services, I think Councillor Kent touched on there. This is going to be coming back to various committees in the future. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I know you've done quite a bit of speaking on that, so I'm going to jump around the agenda to give your voice a break, but thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on, and then I'll come back to the others, but I'm going to move to item 8 for Councillor Abbas, the report of the Cabinet Member for Culture and Communities, pages 25 to 44 in the report back. Can I ask Councillor Abbas to present his report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is my first report outlining the key areas and the work we have done in my portfolio during last 8 months. As you all are aware, that the Council is facing the challenges that this report should be read and considered in that context. Due to intervention, we have to make some difficult decisions on various levels of service and methods of service delivery now and onward. My portfolio covers various services and recently has been extended to include work of the Community Safety Partnership. As we all know, last few years have been very difficult due to COVID-19 restrictions, but since May 2022, we have tried our utmost best to bring all services back to normal. I start with museum, which is located in Thameside complex in 3 different floors. With very limited budget and staff, our main focus this year is to identify, record and digitalize around 30,000 objects, and we are aiming to achieve this by June 2023. The first time ever, our team has started a conversation with Essex Fire Museum to display articles in both museums and agreed to work together in future. And on Thameside Theatre, as you all know, is also located in Thameside Complex on 2 different floors. Due to a history of underinvestment and life of building, it requires significant improvements. Despite difficult financial situation, we were able to repair ventilation system and raised seating capacity back to 300. The Panto has been a success, but overall income is not enough to cover the costs. We have secured funding from Creative Vestry and UK Shared Prosperity Fund for art and culture-related activities. We are supporting and have supported various creative and cultural organizations in the last 8 months. We are core consortium partner and providing match funding for the START, which is a program of Thurrock Creative People and Place program funded by Arts Council of England. I will just briefly touch on all these key points. So, community-led local development. The focus of CLDD program is to support local SME businesses, as well as new startups and investments in projects that help unemployed or economically inactive residents to become economically active. Over 1,000 registered SMEs have been contacted in the last 2 months. Around 250 residents have been registered to date, with almost 70 helped into work. Building strong and resilient communities is important for integration and cohesion in our borough. And with this in mind, I initiated meetings with different community groups and voluntary sector organizations and met around 50 of them in New Town Hall. Many of the groups I have met are supporting diverse communities who have not always felt they have a choice or influence as Thurrock residents. Now they have more confidence to achieve more and to link with local services. We hosted a very successful marketplace, first time ever in this council, in Interfaith Week, which helped to showcase the diversity of faith in Thurrock. We established new Hindu and Tamil prayer services in Grays. Although the communities have lived here for some decades, they no longer need to travel out of the borough to practice their religion, and we welcome the contribution they can now make locally. With help of environment team, we have improved dedicated Muslim burial section and developed a dedicated burial section for our Nepalese Gurkha war heroes and community. We also adopted a tree and installed a plaque in Greystown Park to remember the victims of Srebrenica's genocide. A cost of living conference was held in December 2022 with over 100 services, businesses, schools and community groups coming together to map current support and consider future opportunities. Recently, I had the pleasure of launching the Avely Community Foundation minibus, which has already supported over 200 residents and many organizations. Avely Community Hub was launched in August 2022, and the Purfleet Hub was reopened in March 2022, and has significantly expanded with a wide range of services for residents and extends from school uniform provisions for families on a low income, art classes, a pantry section, a community fridge, and we are also planning to open a community shop in Garrison Estate. In partnership with CVS, funds have been invested in supporting community initiatives, and now funding panel is in place to consider new applications. It is important to note that these projects were not possible to deliver without the help and support of our brilliant team of volunteers. Myself and my team are committed to improve the Council's engagement with all communities, faith or non-faith groups, and particularly working with and supporting those who face barriers or marginalised. We joined the Library Consortium in April 2021, and now more than 7.3 million items are available for Thurrock residents. Physical stock is supplemented by expanding digital library, consisting of thousands of e-books, e-audiobooks, newspapers and magazines. It is encouraging to note an increase in usage of online apps. Grays and Chadwell Library host Lower Thames Crossing documents, and Barclays Bank branch is now operating at Corringham Library. These two initiatives are also generating income for us. Our library services are extended with the support of Citizen Advice and Thurrock Adult Community College under self-service agreement. To reach out to more residents, a dedicated library Facebook page went live in October, and Wi-Fi printing was successfully launched in November 2022. Our online services and bite-sized sessions where residents can book in for sport have been a great success. Our libraries and hubs have responded to the cost of living crisis by offering residents free, safe, and sportive warm spaces on selected days. We provided free SIM cards to dozens of residents. A successful 10K joint health literacy bid with Public Health will enable the upskilling of staff at 3 libraries. This is due to launch in March 2023. We are exploring different options to improve and further better our library services and welcome more service contacts to ensure better outcome for our residents. Thurrock Registrar, the Registrar Office was relocated to our brand new Town Hall building. We have improved and simplified our website and registration process, including customer service training for our team. With numerous improvements, we have exceeded our income target. We will continue to promote and improve our services to ensure services are delivered efficiently and meets the user's need. As I earlier mentioned, the Culture and Communities portfolio has recently been extended to include the work of Community Safety Partnership, which is a key in supporting Thurrock's communities. So this year, our priorities are tackling disproportionately in relation to violence against women and girls, breaking the cycle of domestic abuse, in line with domestic abuse duty and needs assessment, tackling gang-related activities and offensive weapons, and reduce drug-driving violence. We are also looking at measures to preventing violence against extremism locally, reducing harm to and safeguard victims from hate crime. We are committed to tackling community-based antisocial behaviour and safeguarding victims. Human trafficking and modern-day slavery and organised crime, immigration crime. We are also working to safer streets through increased visibility and community engagement. And in the last year, we welcomed Ukrainian and Afghan refugees and supported Hate Crime Awareness Week and with pop-up events in Grace. In October 2022, a memorial service was held to remember 39 victims of lorry tragedy and unveiled a memorial to set out our commitment to prevent human trafficking. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions, any recommendations, any suggestions, anything. I'm more than open here.
Thank you, Councillor Abbas, for your report. Has any member have a question? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming, Councillor Abbas, to the committee. I would actually had the page, but on one of the parts you mentioned the first Hindu prayers. I joined you for that event, and I was just wondering how that has continued since then. Is it still quite a success? Have the numbers of people attending that increased?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question, and thank you for your support. You attended this first service. The service is ongoing. Service is being held every third Sunday of the month, and this is the participants are growing, and the community is very kind of thankful for having this facility here. And not just this one. After all these my meetings, we also listen to feedback from our Nepalese Gurkha communities, and we set up a special dedicated cemetery for them in West Thurrock.
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to attempt to make sense of all my scribblings here. Thank you, Councillor Abbas, for your report. Just coming round to the theatre, Thameside Theatre. I mean, I enjoy going to see shows just like many, many others. In fact, I'm actually going to a show next week. Often eat out, make a really nice evening of it. But I know these shows that I actually go to see don't actually come to the Thameside, and I know that's an old conversation regarding the seating capacity and the changing rooms, etc., etc., etc. But really, my question really is the portfolio holder looking maybe like a plan B? Are you looking for to develop like a strategy to actually put on alternative larger shows. And I'm not talking necessarily about building at this stage or a venue. Is there work in progress to actually encourage bigger productions to the area via another, do you sort of see what I mean? I'm not necessarily talking about the venue itself, but I think it's important moving forward for Thurrock and Thurrock residents that we are conscious that we do need to bring in these larger attractions into the area. And I know they can't be held at the Thames side itself. So it's a bit vague, so I'm sorry about that one.
Thank you for your question. We understand, the Thames side theatre has it is very important, place, and especially in terms of art and culture, this is, at this time, this is our base. But while we understand, the importance of this theatre, and as I've earlier mentioned, this is on 2 floors. So technically, this is very difficult. So stage is on, for instance, on 1 floor, and the changing facility is on the 2nd floor. So this is, and then the area of the stage actually is not enough for visiting tours to do these things. So as I said, we have secured some funding, and we look at different avenues. We are working with different developers. We have funding for those things, and we want to take this art and culture to different communities. It shouldn't be focused on one building. So our aim is to take these things to, for instance, in Pyrefleet, in Corringham, in Aveley. So this is our commitment to not focus on one premises, but take these art and culture activities and involve more communities, into this. And obviously, we will keep you updated on the progress of this.
Yeah, okay, I'll leave that one there. I've got some other questions, but I'll bring them later. Thank you.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, Harlow was successful in applying for and awarded £20 million of Levelling Up government funding to improve and safeguard their arts offer. Knowing that the Thames side, and indeed our arts offer, was under threat, why did you not ensure officers applied for Levelling Up funding for Thurrock? No applications were submitted that I'm aware of. Have you given up on the Thames side and arts and culture in Thurrock?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. We all are concerned, and our officers, they are really working hard, and we are committed, and we are a designated area in Levelling Up for culture and place and art by Arts Council. So it's not something we have ignored or something we already are in this Levelling Up. I think this is, we are in category 2 or 1, but I can come back to you on this. But this is something we have secured in different, there are 3 organizations who have successfully received funding under this Levelling Up for culture. Those are Canitica People, Arts Outburst, and Coda Dance Company.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, my question was specifically with regards to that funding allocation towards the Thames side. In the report, you talk about the importance of creative experiences for children and young people, and has continued to be an important outcome for the Thames side theatre. You acknowledge the importance of the Thames side, but publicly won't support it. I wondered how many events you've actually attended at the Thames side, if you've met with them, and if you will promise to meet with them to discuss and ensure the continuation of the Thames side theatre in Thurrock.
Thank you, Councillor. I think there is a perception, by certain individuals, we who are in administration, we are maybe against art and culture. If you look at these reports and the activities we have carried out, those are phenomenal. No other portfolio has reached out to such number of these communities. I did attend these different events in Thames side. I regularly go there. I meet different groups, and if any other group want to meet me or see me, I'm more than happy to see them. I actually met some of them a few days ago. We attended a meeting, and I even offered them. We are here. We are open. If you have any suggestions, any recommendations, we are here to take those recommendations on board.
got a few more questions, but I'm happy if others have questions and come back in later, Chair, if that's what you prefer.
That's fine. Councillor Arnold had another question.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think going back to my question, actually, I don't think I sort of worked on that properly enough. And really, I was looking at, I reasonably regularly travel to Southend, Dartford, etc., to see larger shows, shows that will never be able to be put on the Thames side. And really, I was just sort of delving in just to see if we were looking at how we could get those shows to actually come to into Thurrock. Preliminary work. Somewhere else around the borough, for those larger shows. But maybe on another day, I'll construct my question a little bit better. Just going back to the registry office, I think it's page 43, 8.8, and it's saying that can you give some examples of how you? Can you give some examples how you intend to increase the marketing opportunities? I mean, and I will say I had the pleasure of getting married in the registry office last year, very enjoyable experience. But even then, I could maybe sort of looking around at the time, I could see opportunities with sort of IT and getting people more inclusive. On screens and that can actually join in. So can you give me some ideas of what your marketing opportunities are, please?
Thank you. Since we have moved from Thames side to this, obviously this is a new venue, and with very significant improvements, and we have kind of adopted to new technology as well. Like for instance, we have this now we are offering live streaming and a choice of music what they want. So we have a new garden. There are continuously improvements and these things. We have new halls. So we are continuously. We have simplified even the websites. We have signposted whenever, whether it's registration, whether it's birth, whether it's death. So there has been significant improvements, and we are always looking for avenues to improve. If you or any other member have any suggestions, as I said again and again, please reach out to us, pass on your recommendations, and we will look into this, and if practically possible, we will implement all those new ideas.
Thank you. I mean, I might just take that up with you, actually, because I could definitely see some opportunities to actually enhance the experience of the people that use the registry office, and actually just to generate income. But really, actually, to make the whole experience much more pleasurable. But maybe I will put that with you afterwards. Thank you.
If you or any other member want to visit us, you are more than welcome.
Just regarding the Thames, I have requested, obviously it didn't be on the agenda tonight, but when the report is ready, it comes back to this committee in the future, and I'm more than happy to have an extraordinary meeting to do that, because I know there'll be other items that we might need to bring forward to this committee before Purda. Councillor Kent.
I've got a number of questions, so if I perhaps start with one or two, then let others come back. So Councillor Holloway asked about levelling up funds and a levelling up bid. So to be quite clear, Arts Council England has designated Thurrock as a levelling up for culture place. Why was there no levelling up bid from Thurrock for the arts? That's the first. The second is the budget documents that we have here say that there has been agreed a £90,000 saving within your portfolio for next year. Jonathan has told us that the savings are there. Can you give us a flavour of those £90,000 worth of savings?
I think the saving paper is under consideration. There are different discussions. We haven't made any final decision on these things. As soon as we will have this, I will get back to you. As I said, the three organisations have already received, and we are looking at different avenues to explore, where we can have a kind of a centralised building or an opportunity where we can bring all these key art and culture, services together. And the work is ongoing. Our officers are working on this, and I will update you specifically on this later on.
Councillor Kent, are you happy to have an answer in writing?
No, I'm not, actually, because the question was, why was there no levelling up bid from Thurrock? I don't, particularly want to know about other avenues that are being explored. I'd like to know why there was no levelling up bid for Thurrock.
Can I, after this meeting, can I come back to you, Councillor, on this? I need some further information from officers. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Kent, you have to be in writing by the sound of it.
Well, did you suggest to officers that a bid came in? Did you press for a bid?
We had various discussions on this, and as I said, I'm more than happy to come back to you on this. And Gerard is here if the chair allows him to, he can answer this.
Thank you, Chair. You provide any further on Councillor Kent's question?
Yes, specifically in relation to the Levelling Up Fund. Both in round 1 and round 2, officers did consider looking at a bid for Levelling Up funding right across the whole of the criteria that was identified. And at the time, it was agreed that we weren't going to put in a bid, largely for a whole host of reasons, because we were a level 2 place, and the presumption from the department was to focus on level 1 places. There was also a significant investment that would have been required in order to put the bid together, as well as thinking about wider capacity and capability in terms of delivering those bids once they came through.
Councillor Kent, does that answer your question?
That's helpful. That's very helpful. That was actually very helpful. There was lots in there, but the key bit that I took away from that was that to put these bids in and to make sure they've got a chance of being successful, it takes a good deal of investment. And at the moment, we just haven't got the money to invest in trying to get those deals over the line.
As we're coming up for 25 minutes on this, does any member have any final questions? Councillor Holloway first.
Thank you. You talk about in the report and your presentation, Councillor, that you've met with a list of 50 groups you've invited into the new building. Will you make a list of those 50 groups public? My other question is, have you, Councillor Kent referenced £90,000 worth of savings, which you can't elaborate on. Unfortunately, I just don't think that's good enough, bearing in mind the scrutiny meeting this evening. Have you notified, and if not, when will you notify the voluntary sector of the cuts that they should expect, what plans cuts they will be? There are reports that it will be 100% of cuts to organisations locally. When will you be telling them? My next question is with regards to libraries. Again, as part of that, the cuts that are going to be made, will you assure and promise the committee and residents this evening that you don't plan on closing any libraries? And similarly, with regards to the violence against women and girls, which again you prioritised in your presentation, will you assure the groups locally providing invaluable and essential care that 100% of the funding that's currently being received by those groups, they will continue to receive it?
Thank you. We are more than happy to make this the list, the group we have met public. We have no problem. If you separately want, we are more than happy to send you these things. And on libraries, there are currently no plan to close any library services. If there would be any plan, there is a consultation process. And everything, if there would be a significant change in these things, that would come to this committee. We will not make any executive decisions to close libraries. Neither I am in favour of closing libraries. Yes, there could be a transformation of services, various services. And as I said, there are difficult situations because of the financial situation we are in. And if there would be any decision on these things, we will obviously update you. We will make, we don't want to promise something which we cannot deliver. If there would be any change, we will come back to you, and that would be transparent. All these members will have a say on those things. And on funding, we are in contact with various organisations. As you said, We are making cuts, 100% cuts. I don't know which organization specifically you are talking about. We are in touch with different organizations, and even currently there is a funding panel is in place, and members are there. You know, they are waiting for the scoring, and we will deliver this our promises on these funding, because these fundings are for communities. You know, so communities are ultimately, but we will see which organizations are entitled to get these funding, and we will make sure the organizations where our residents can benefit the maximum, those organizations get the relevant support. And you did mention about, I think it was violence against women and girls. We are committed, you know, to protect these vulnerable women and girls, and we are also committed to provide appropriate support, and we will continue to do this, even though there are difficult situations or circumstances. But still, you know, this is our commitment to support all these vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Councillor Kent, did you have a final question?
Well, I've got a few. So you reference in the report the Thurrock Plan for Culture, which will become the cultural strategy. That, in my memory, will be the third time that the council's tried to put together a cultural strategy in the last 6 years. I think the last one was 2019. Expensive external consultants brought in to put that together. I attended quite a few consultation meetings for that. It never saw the light of day. Could you let us see what the outcome of the last two attempts were, and B, give us some assurance that this one is actually going to get over the line, that it's actually going to see the light of day? And just as an aside, the consultant that you've got working on it has had to leave the wedding room where they were based in this building because it's too mouldy for them to work in there, in this brand new building. Second, I would like an update on progress on having Thurrock Museum accredited with the Arts Council. Like an update on where we are with that. You talk about the cultural people and places. I think you refer to it as a bid. It's not a bid now. It's been agreed. There's a funding agreement in place, and there are two aspects to it. The first is that in the agreement, Thurrock Council will invest at least £10,000 cash per year, and will also provide use of Thurrock Libraries, hubs, theatre and museum free of charge. Can you just give us some comfort that that is still the case, and that will happen? And I just want to pick up on Councillor Arnold's question, which, you know, I think we all understood what you were driving at. And you know, fact is that the Thameside Theatre is a professional theatre. It may be small in capacity, but it is a professional theatre. And theatre needs a base. It can't be some kind of travelling circus. It can't be a travelling circus. And fact is that no professional organisation is going to come in to a village hall or a school lecture theatre to put on any kind of act. They're just not going to. So losing the theatre means that we would lose that kind of professional company ever coming here. To directly answer Councillor Arnold's question, I remember at least half a dozen times in the past. So, 12 Days of Christmas was an extravaganza that was put on by the Thameside at Tilbury Cruise Terminal. Much larger space. You can get a lot more people in there. Fantastic. It cost £60,000 a week back in 2008, 2009 to put that on. That's the cost of bringing in staging, bringing in seating, bringing in lighting rigs, bringing in sound decks. So the thought that you can kind of somehow close the Thameside and put it out there somewhere and save money is frankly for the birds. It just won't happen. The second one I remember, which was really good, was going back probably 20 years now. Oh, What a Lovely War, in a huge marquee at Blackshots. Again, fantastic, worked really well, but incredibly expensive. And the fear is a real fear that you lose the Thames side, you lose that complex, and you lose all of that art, that culture, that creativity, and those events coming here. They'll just disappear.
Thank you, for your some kind of brief history of your knowledge, which I personally value, And I will ask, if there are kind of, as I said, like, suggestions, recommendations, please reach out to us. As you know, previously, when you asked for this organization, we supported this because it was a brilliant idea. So on these museum accreditation, we are committed to this, but there are certain requirements. And part of one is, like, we need to have a permanent place. And because of these rumours going around Thameside building, it would be very difficult. And just for the record, an application was made in 2021, but on recommendations of Art Council, it was withdrawn because of this uncertainty around Thameside building. But part of this is we obviously, as I earlier mentioned, and I mentioned this in last our meeting, that we also need to kind of identify all the articles. We need to record all those things, and digitalization is part of them. So as soon as we will have this permanent place, and as soon as there is a decision on the future of Thameside, we will apply for these things. And you did mention on art and culture previous consultations. I can certainly ask officers, and more than happy to share with you and with the wider ONS members. Your other question was on.
So the other question was on the CPP did what is now a project.
Yeah.
So the council.
We are committed.
You're committed to both the £10,000 a year, at least £10,000 a year, and free access to all those buildings.
We are committed to this funding, but we have already committed, and we are providing them this for 3 years. We have this commitment. And on place, I can certainly look into this. I don't know if we have this commitment, then we will fulfill this commitment.
Yes, Chair, just to confirm that the current position is still the same in relation to CPP, both in relation to the £10,000 funding and utilisation of the buildings as part of the wider CPP programme.
Okay, thank you, members. I find it a real comfort that you said, Councillor Best, that this decision will come back to this committee in regards to the libraries and other things around the answers you've given. So I find that really reassuring. And there is some written information you're going to update the committee members with. But thank you very much for your time, Councillor Best.
We are open. If any member have any suggestions, any recommendations, and if it's practically possible, we are more than happy to take them on board.
Councillor Tandy, you did a comment on what Councillor Best has said?
Violence against women and girls. The development of street pastures project in Grace. Could you elaborate more on that?
We already have this engagement pop-up events, for 60 days of action, and we are obviously continue this, because we need to raise more awareness, and we are committed to do these things.
And also, obviously, being in a diversity borough, I have to say, Cabinet Member for Culture and Communities, you're doing a great job. Seeing single-handedly with the Gurkha community, the Sri Lankans, the African community, what work you've done. And like I say, you live in this borough, you do have a voice, and you're definitely letting the community have that voice. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbas, for your report and coming on to committee tonight. Like I say, we welcome you back when there's future decisions to be made. You're more than welcome to stay, or you can enjoy the rest of your evening, which I wouldn't blame you at all for doing so. Let's give it a couple of minutes. To go back onto the agenda item 6, the capital strategy 2023/24 has been tabled. The name of this report has been changed to Treasury Management Strategy 2023/24. Can I please ask Jonathan Wilson to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. The Treasury Management Strategy links back into the budget conversation. I won't go through the context. We've been through the context as part of that budget report. The key 3 elements from the intervention directions we referenced, but just to remind members, they were the requirement to update this strategy, and that incorporates the capital strategy and investment strategy. So this document sets out and addresses that requirement. It is linked to the strict reduction of debt, but as we said earlier, the plans are in place to achieve that reduction of debt, but they continue to evolve to deliver that. And thirdly, the requirement for the revision of the MRP policy. So that policy has been updated and refreshed and is a key part of this document. Essentially, this document links together the subsequent report on capital. It links that through to the borrowing that funds our capital programme. It reflects the change in strategy in respect of investments, and it is effectively resetting in the wider context of delivering financial sustainability for the council. The key things have been referenced in the budget discussion, and that includes the divestment of investments, and the strategy includes reference to that, and we'll come to that shortly. But it's also, as the budget report was, to some extent, a holding position, and the holding position is driven essentially by a number of assumptions, and they are set out on the second page of the strategy itself, and they are back linked to the budget conversation, that ongoing conversation about financial support and the impact of that plays through this strategy. It references the asset disposals and capital investment sales, the impairment of investment assets that we've referenced in Q2, and which continue to be assessed. That's why they remain assumptions. Borrowing levels are based on assumptions then about all of those things. They all come back to what borrowing level will we set in various points in the future. And we've also referenced in the previous conversation accounting treatments and how they're applied to investments, both going backwards and forwards. This is obviously forward-looking, so this is with reference to that. What it broadly sums up is our change in approach to commercial investments, our change in approach to the existing portfolio of commercial investments, the revision to the policy to write down those investments, and is aligned to the wider MTFS strategy of divestment, and this sets out a strategy to deliver that based on everything we know now. And that part is key, again, because we need to revisit those assumptions throughout the year periodically. And when those assumptions move with significant impact, we will need to bring this strategy back to you as members for reconsideration, so you understand the moving parts that underpin those changes. I think those key elements are relatively straightforward for everyone, hopefully, to understand, in terms of we have high borrowing levels linked to high investment levels, and a resolution to those is hopefully clear to all. The broader exceptional support conversation creates this ongoing capitalisation direction. That's referenced in some of the tables. When you see capital spending plans, for example, you will see reference at the bottom of that table in Table 1 to capitalisation direction. And you will see that that represents ongoing requests for capitalisation, which become cumulative until we sell things to address them. The portfolio of investments has been reassessed. I also referenced that earlier, between capital, those in capital in nature and those revenue in nature. Table 2 sets out a a breakdown of our investments, and it includes them at their current balance sheet values. So the solar investment is included currently at its full value, but obviously we know we also have an impairment assessment alongside that, which writes that down, that creates then the need for the capitalisation. The wider portfolio of investments are under constant review, and it's important for members to know that, and we will be bringing back updates through hopefully a new committee being set up to inform Cabinet, and also through the wider investment group set up through the intervention process. That includes, across the piece, legal action where required, and there are avenues for resources to come back into the council, which also play a part in the ultimate resolution of issues. But from a purely accounting point of view, we don't include any potential upside from those actions until there's enough certainty to indicate an outcome. And broadly, it's not that we don't think there will be outcomes, because we very much hope there will be, but they are still at a relatively early stage in legal processes, and we need to come to you with confidence about figures, and if we include figures of that nature, we will only do so when we're confident that they're reasonable. So that's another mechanism that perhaps isn't reflected in here, but nevertheless is important. There's a section in here under paragraph 42, which is broadly in the section on commercial income more widely, which sets out some of the issues we've had, the assessment of those issues, and the action taken. And you will hopefully see across that piece that this is really a key reset of this strategy, and it also drives how the strategy itself has been put together. So it has responded to the need for relevant indicators for members. It's also effectively addressing the ability to manage risk in the future, and we ultimately need to be in a position where our wider treasury management capital investment strategies complement each other and manage risk, and ensure the security of the council's funds is critical, alongside, as we said earlier, liquidity, and lastly yield, and yield only where it supports the wider aims of treasury management and enables the council to ensure its resources are maximised within very narrow parameters. So certainly not along the lines of the wider commercial strategy we've had to date. The report goes through the broad portfolio that we've talked through. It links back to the capital programme that we'll come on to. It references the area I referred to earlier, the capital financing requirement, makes an assessment of our borrowing need based on our current position. That will inevitably change as we progress. And it also provides some historic context to the level and form of borrowing. So there's tables and graphs in there that demonstrate how we've had temporary borrowing replaced with PWLB, how that level is projected to progress in future. And it more widely, as I referenced earlier, shows that with an MRP policy as we've set it, where we write down investments over their lives, and with interest costs where they currently are, the income that attaches to the current portfolio is significantly outweighed by the cost of holding it. And there are a series of tables and indicators that demonstrate that with our projections into the future. The other key part is the MRP policy statement. It goes into detail. It sets out the requirements from the Prudential Code. It shows members how we are then applying those. And broadly, we are writing down investments over their useful lives. For capital assets, it's through what we call an annuity method. And for investment assets, it's on a straight line basis over their lives. And that contributes to the significant figure we saw earlier in the MTFS of 74 million for the current, for 23-4 year. It also references how capitalisation is written down and the direction under which that happens. That's under paragraph 76 of the report, and it confirms it's a 20-year life to capitalisation, and that's also there where the 1% additional interest attaches to for the revenue elements. More widely, cash flow management is part of the picture, and it references back to that balance between holding debt in the short term, enabling further decisions to be made by members around investments and assets, and enabling us to reset that borrowing strategy into the future. So I'll stop there at the summary level, but I think that the key to take away for me is that we've taken really quick action to replace completely an existing strategy, completely rewrite it, and seek technical support from a leading expert who's supporting Slough, from our commissioners who've got wide experience in this area, and to seek constant views from commissioners and directors and ensure everybody across the council understands the basis for the report and approves the basis for the report. But the key to me then is that we are meeting the directions set, one of which was to set these strategies, but also we need to now take forward the plans to reduce debt as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. One quick question from me. Point 77, the MRP or minimum revenue provision for 23-24. It says in previous years council has not applied MRP to capital investments. Why was that never done?
So as it sets out in the report, the approach taken was on the understanding that the loan balance itself that funds the investment would then repay the loan in full at the conclusion of, for example, a bond's life ending. What that didn't factor in was obviously the range of issues that have happened with, for instance, the solar assets. So it wasn't anticipating an impairment as significant or otherwise. And inevitably, wherever that risk materialised, there's no protection then when the MRP policy has been set on that basis. The policy as we've got it now would provide that protection because we're writing down the debt on an ongoing basis despite the performance of the investment. And so if that happened today, halfway through the life of the asset, you've already written down half of it. So your exposure is the remaining balance. Our exposure was to the full balance, and any reduction in value therefore materialised as that impairment.
Thank you for that. And Jonathan, to your knowledge, the non-applied MRP to capital investments, has that always been the case at this authority?
Without that policy, you wouldn't invest in the first place. Because if you can see in 23-4, there's a £74 million standard MRP charge attaching to the portfolio. When you see the figures about the net cost of holding investments with that MRP charge, you wouldn't make a decision to invest without an MRP policy that enabled a return to be made. So I suppose as we look through the potential code iterations, the first iteration enabled that to be an option. That option was closed down actually by the second, but not fully, because it doesn't mean you had to write it off on a straight line basis. It meant you had to make some MRP charge. So there was still a judgment call in that. Had the guidance said you must write them down over their lives, it would have prevented, it would have almost certainly prevented investment being made of that nature.
Thank you. One last question for me before I open up to members. You said the second iteration of that guidelines, for want of a better word. Roughly what year did that become sort of circulated as a strategy? So
it's obviously the code itself is subject to various iterations. So we're waiting a new iteration. We've actually anticipated the next iteration by taking the prudent policy that we've applied here. But the one I'm referring to, I think, is 18-19, and it sounds in the context of what we know now, and it is significant. But I do come back to what it didn't say was mandate. You had to write it down over your lives. It mandated a charge being made, and there is judgment in that. So, but 1819 is the key date. Were expecting a new code for 23.4. It's likely to be 24.5. One of the reasons for that is that the sector as a whole will be required to make MRP charges similar to the ones we're making on existing investments where they've had a different MRP policy, not necessarily the same as ours. That causes everybody who made a decision to invest with one set of rules to adapt to a new set of rules difficult, both for their budget and, you know, given they made decisions in a different context. And that's one of the things the department are grappling with. But opposite that is the prudence aspect, and people will want to avoid being in the situation we found ourselves in.
Thank you for the answers, very helpful. A question from Councillor Kent.
I'm afraid it's on MRP again, which is really kind of complicated, but is just incredibly important. So, as I understand it, the guidelines give 4 broad ways of measuring or determining MRP. You're recommending that MRP is paid over the life of the asset. Can you tell me why that option and not the other 3? Yeah. And I can read the document, but tell me why I should have confidence that that will actually work when what we've been told previously about MRP didn't turn out to be accurate.
So it's kind of back to the answer to the previous question. Yeah. So the option 3, just for members' benefit, that Councillor Kent is referencing is the asset life method. That is, we write down the debt associated with the funding of whether it's a capital asset or an investment over the life of said asset. And the intention with that is that you're borrowing, obviously one comes to an end when the life of the asset ends, so you're running in parallel to the asset itself. And it is writing off a percentage of the asset that in a capital asset normally approximates to a depreciation charge at effectively the wear and tear of that asset. Now with an investment it's obviously slightly different, and obviously going back to that original reason, the hope was that there wouldn't be a write down of value in the investment itself, and that led to this MRP policy. Now had we written down over any period, any policy, so whether it was a 20-year life or a 5-year life or the life of the asset itself, every time we write down the debt, we are reducing our capital financing requirement and managing the risk that's attaching to that. So we're writing off value already. So had we written off, say, 30% of the solar investment, broadly, that would have been around 200 million. And we ended up impairing that asset to similar levels, and we would have already written that down. So we wouldn't have been exposed to the risk. We would have had to make an assessment of value, and the assessment would have been, because we've written down to that point in time and we've already written that amount off, our value is now largely consummate with the asset itself in its current value. We didn't do that, and therefore that protection was not afforded to us, and therefore we've had to write it down in one go at one point in time, which we saw at Q2. So hopefully, I think that's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other? Councillor Arnold.
Sorry, Councillor, can I come back in on your first question, Councillor Kent, about the reassurance? I can concur with Jonathan's view that the robustness of review that this strategy has been through really has been very, very thorough. And I can also assure you that the support we've been given by commissioners in helping to develop this treasury management strategy has been very, very supportive. So I think we can give you an assurance. I can't comment on what happened in the past, but I can give you an assurance, Councillor, that the level of attention and rigour applied has been significant.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think that's reassuring for members to hear. Councillor Arnold, a question.
Thank you, Chair. These reports are really, really complex. So my kind of method is really to read through to see what I can pick out for myself as being a good question, something that may be really obvious, but sometimes I can't figure out what the actual answer is. Just on page 67, it's got knowledge and skills. And it says the Council uses the knowledge and skills of its officers when considering Treasury investment and borrowing decisions, and where necessary it relies on the expert knowledge of specialist external advisors. The question is, when we've been asking for due diligence, all members have been asking for due diligence over many, many months, and you've not really been able to provide that for us. Can I ask what knowledge and skills officers apply to the current investment portfolio? And if you did ask expert specialist external advisors, what advice did they give you?
So there's two things. One is this strategy is resetting the investment strategy. So when we're talking about advice in this context, we're talking about advice on a strategy that is built on complete reset of the investment. So there's no further commercial investments planned at all. And that is for a number of reasons, not least because of the experience we've had, but more broadly, it's because the guidance in the sector, and part of that is the MRP policy, and that's why government are resetting this policy and taking their time to do so, because they want to discourage future investment of a similar nature. So there's one, no intention to do it, and two, no financial reason to do it. So when we talk about advice in this context, what we're really talking about is advice on Treasury management, and we've appointed Link as our Treasury management advisors. So they are to provide advice on the strategy, and they are providing a training session for members on, I think, the 16th of February, and that's open to all members. Would encourage people to come along, and they can give a broader view on the wider Treasury management approach in the sector, which I think hopefully members will also find useful. What you're referring to, I think, Councillor Arnold, is back against initial investment decisions and the supporting evidence to make those decisions. That is obviously clearly the focus still of the BVI. We are very close to getting the outcome from that BVI. It's inevitable. It will focus on the points investments were made and how those decisions were taken. And we all need to have and see the full picture of the assessment they've made, because I think everyone's got some knowledge of some elements of it, but there's a wider picture to this that we need. That BVI has spent a number of months now collating that picture, and it will really be helpful for the organisation when that report comes through, so we can all read that. And I suggest then we can consider the findings of that.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Any other members with questions for this? Councillor Kent.
Just make a comment, really, linking this with the general budget and the kind of importance of all this stuff. So next year, our debt repayments will hit £49 million. That's 3.5 times more than we spend on emptying the bins. 3.5 times more than we spend on the entire refuse service. You know, it's about 66% more than we spend on the whole of public realm. You know, we've just got to do everything we can to make sure that we never, ever, end up in this kind of position again, and it should be a warning for just about every other council in the country. Yes, point well made there. Thank you. Any other member wishes to speak on this item before we go to the recommendations? Recommendation 1.1, the committee comment on the Treasury Management Strategy. I think we've done that, unless any member would like to add any particular comment around that recommendation. That's agreed. 1.2, the committee consider the current assumptions set on page 3 of the strategy. Is that agreed? Agreed. 1.3, the committee consider the strategy in context of directions issued by the Secretary of State for living homes and communities. Is that agreed? And then we've got a 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 that the committee note. So unless any member wishes to bring up any particular point. And finally 1.8, that the borrowing strategy supporting the commercial investment portfolio will be reset along wider revisions to the strategy in 2023/24. Agreed. Okay, thank you very much, members. Just before we move on, I can see we've got some items left, and time is ticking, as they say. So, members, I'd like to move a motion about notice to suspend Council Procedure Rule 11.1 to allow the meeting to continue beyond the 2.5-hour time limit. Can I have a second for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Kent. Is that agreed by members? Thank you. And just before we go into the next item, I'd just like to adjourn for 5 minutes to be back here at 20:57, just so for a comfort break. Thank you. To reconvene the meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee at 2100. We've got a couple of items left on the agenda. If we could go to item 7, with the Capital Programme 2023 to 2024. This has been tabled. The name of the report has changed to Capital Bids and Capital Programme Update. Can I ask Jonathan Wilson to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. And just to note, we've issued everybody with an additional page, which just aligned with our final tables when we were completing this last week at high speed, and just to correct that and make sure those figures in Table 2 are aligned. I did say, Lucy, you'd like me to read that paragraph, I think, wouldn't you? So the total cost of the draft capital programme in 23-24 is currently projected to be 62.158 million, broken down as 37.043 million relating to the general fund and 25.115 million relating to the HRA. The HRA capital programme is part funded by borrowing, grants and reserves, and the associated revenue costs are managed from within the HRA budget envelope. The general fund projects require prudential borrowing of 19.859 million, and the associated revenue impacts are also budgeted. And that does provide a good starting point for a brief update, hopefully in the context of the other reports we've had. So we have a programme. The key focus under particularly the 114 notice and our wider intervention directions is around borrowing, hence why we've referenced specifically general fund prudential borrowing. And the reason we are less explicit on HRA borrowing, not because it's not in scope, but as I said to some members earlier, the HRA is effectively ring-fenced in its own budget. It generates its own income, it has its own cost base, and its revenue interest costs are attaching to any borrowing they take out, are managed within their budgets. So to the extent the HRA budget is approved, it includes associated capital programme attached to the HRA. Nevertheless, we've included the HRA as part of the capital programme, as you'd expect. Just a few things to note alongside the wider report. So the programme itself is obviously under review, has been reviewed, but this has come following all the wider actions we've been taking, and it's, again, probably even more than the other areas, a holding position, because we need further time to explore the programme. We've got a holding position supported by a 114 notice, because that means, anyway, we are already assessing whether spend happens. And that's in the context of the 114, remembering that where we're in contractual arrangements, that doesn't mean we break our contractual arrangements. We continue to honour the contracts we have in place and the existing projects. But it does mean we need to consider where we're potentially going to commit the council to new spend, new borrowing, and therefore impact on that requirement for debt reduction. Where we've got grant-funded projects or other third-party sources of funding, or they're funded from within reserves that we already hold, there's more flexibility. So we certainly, for example, today I was considering a schools capital programme bid to ensure there are sufficient school places available for children in Thurrock. That is a grant government-funded allocation, capital allocation, and that doesn't present any wider financial risk to the council. So projects funded by core grants, whether it's highways or schools, will enable us to deliver in those areas. The wider piece of work will then focus on a review of the programme to consider how to two things: manage our spend and managing our borrowing and associated interest cost. And that may be a combination of taking projects out of the programme, but it could also be reassessment of projects. And in that vein, we have, alongside the programme that's agreed and running, a list of projects that are currently on hold for various reasons depending on the project. And an example of that certainly would be continued consideration of Stamford Station and Grays Underpass, for example. And it's not that they haven't got agreed budgets and funding sources, but the current financial context, particularly with inflationary factors and borrowing costs, means they are significant enough to seek that reassessment, and that reassessment is happening. And when a decision is made on how to progress those projects, they will either come back into the programme, remain on hold, or wider action may be taken to take a different direction with them. I think that's broadly necessary at any time where there's inflation at the levels we've been experiencing and the impact that's had on construction costs particularly. And I know that's being considered more widely by the Place Directorate in those examples. I'd also note that we are developing the reporting on the capital programme, and we are doing that in parallel. This is the budget setting part of that. This will continue to evolve, and we will seek to bring more clarity to members as we reset these programmes and move this capital programme forward on its journey. And we may bring some additional information for you as members by the time it comes to Cabinet. Broadly, that will just be to in Appendix 2, we've got the prudentially funded projects, and we will just seek to give you a bit more history to those projects in terms of their financial history. So we're looking at that and whether that's achievable in the timescales we have. When we come to capital reporting that this ultimately leads to, we are already looking at how we give you as members more transparent project-based reporting. But again, we need to spend some time developing the right mechanism to do that for you and enable the information to come, and then it will become a two-way process where you as members will comment on that, and we will inevitably evolve the reporting to reflect your requirements. So we recognise, again, back to our original directions about resetting capital strategy, this sits alongside that. There are then a range of projects in Appendix 3 that are proposed to join the programme subject to Cabinet and Council approval ultimately. This report will become part of the budget report as it goes through to Cabinet and Council, and the bids will become an appendix to that report. And that list of projects, have already been reviewed and reduced to ensure projects there that support specific objectives, whether that's health and safety, wider supporting of improved services or improved efficiency of service, and but remain only on hold in the programme, pending then the panels releasing the funding to support them. So I'll stop there, and I think in the context, hopefully, Chair, of the wider reports, that makes sense in that wider context.
Yes, although it's quite a long evening, it does make sense to have these reports. They do link together. That does make sense. I've got one quick question. 5.2 is noted recommendations to Council include delegations to Cabinet, and then it mentions Section 106 agreements, and then it also mentions a little bit further down where a scheme is identified to be classed as spend to save, or it goes on to say, or cost reductions or income generation. So my experience of Section 106, it could be, you know, an improved bus stop, it could be road improvements and things like that, but or park equipment. I don't. This example, I said I don't see those as a spend to save or a cost reduction or an income generation. So what could potentially be an example of one of those? I know you're not a planning officer, but
so an obvious example of spend to save might be. So we've implemented the new street lighting. It's much more efficient lighting. That has significant impacts on revenue, whether that's through just the cost of the bulbs and the lighting itself from the more efficient bulbs, or the wider network of the ability to turn on and off lighting as required. But more broadly, the spend to save approach, and it is de-linked, it's not linked to the Section 106, they're two separate points. There's one where we've got grant funding, we can progress a project, and the second one is essentially where there's a business case that makes sense and similar to the savings business cases. So it needs to come through the directorate, be challenged by the DMT, be challenged ultimately by our corporate transformation team before it becomes a proposed project, and then it would need to be supported by Cabinet. So the process is that. I think it's a fairly standard approach at councils, but we include it again, as we always do, for consideration by members.
thank you. It's good to hear those extra layers of governance in and around those decisions. Councillor Kent, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple. I mean, the first thing is this is another one of those reports that is, it's almost a snapshot, isn't it? You know, we're not going to know just what capital projects are going forward until sometime after April. So, you know, it is a snapshot, and I kind of accept that. A couple of specific questions, if you can help. If we look at Appendix 2, New River development, we're looking at a £9,000 spend this year and £75,000 spend next year. I'd just like to understand just what that is. I don't know if you can help, but it would be good if you could. And picking up on what Chair was saying, the spend to save funded by potential borrowing, 136,000 this year and over £1 million next year. Why such a steep jump, I think is the question. And the final thing I want to say is I'm really pleased to see the Treasury Management and the Capital Programme as two separate reports. I think it makes it easier to follow them, easier to understand them, and easier to just tease out in your own mind what decision it is you're making and how you're making it. I think that if we'd have followed this approach for the last kind of 4, 5, 6 years, we may have come to a different place.
Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for the comment. The New River, I will have to come back to you on that. I'll need to go back to the project's owner, but I'll come back to you tomorrow on that. Sorry, your second point was around which line?
Again, it's in the investment portfolio spend to save. It's a huge jump from 136,000 this year to over £1 million next. I just wonder why there's such a big jump programme.
Let me come back on both of those, Councillor. I think it's sensible to go and get the detail of that before responding. So, yeah, that's fine.
Any other member with a particular question for this agenda item and report? No. Any member wish to comment before we move to the recommendations? Okay. Carry through the recommendations I have this evening. Recommendations at Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. 1.1, note the changes. That's agreed. In fact, we'll go 1.1 to 1.4. They all seem to be notes, so if we can agree those. Thank you. 1.5, comment on the proposed delegation to Cabinet to approve additions to the programme based on the criteria set out in section 5.2, which we were just talking about. Any member wish to make a comment around 1.5, or are we happy to take the comments from the questions we made earlier? Yep, thank you. That's great to use the comments earlier. Thank you very much, members. Moving on to the last report of this evening. This is a Coalhouse Fort update, and it. Can I ask Gerald McLeave to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. You have a report on the update and current position and next steps in relation to Coalhouse Fort. As we said it in the paper, the fort itself is an important heritage asset, and I certainly believe important that we maximise its potential as part of the wider cultural offer right across Thurrock, and also importantly that we preserve a scheduled monument. As you'll see from the report, there are a number of different bodies that have an interest in the fort, including Natural England, Historic England, or a range of local community groups and individuals, as well as the council. But you will also know the fort itself has been closed since 2020. As a part of the reconfiguration and the creation of a new interim place directorate, the fort has now moved under place. So it's an opportune time just to consider the future of the fort, and we've set out a number of next steps and actions in the paper for your information. The first being a review and updating of the current maintenance and health and safety plans for the fort and the surrounding area. It has been closed for 3 years. It's prudent just to have a look at that. We also have to undertake an assessment of the strategic fit of the heritage asset itself, how that might sit within a wider emerging cultural strategy going forward. So not considered in isolation, but actually considered as part of the wider cultural offer across the borough. And also considering options for management of the fort, including any new management models involving local community groups. And again, we've also set out a number of tasks connected with all of that, including an update of the conservation management plan, as well as looking at the wider feasibility study and options of future uses for the fort. And I guess also just to say that all of that is obviously in the context of the improvement plan priorities that we have set out and the wider Section 114 position of the council. So we just have to take all of that into consideration. But the first step in that process is to review the current maintenance and health and safety plan since the fort has been closed since 2020. Happy to take any comments or questions from members.
Thank you for your report. Yes, in terms of the time of the pandemic, it couldn't have come at a worse time for Coalhouse Fort. It's remained closed now for 3 years, as you say, since 2020. I've got quite a lot of questions, but I see members are indicating to me as well, so I'm happy to open up to the floor first. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Just seeing the refreshed condition survey, I don't see any sort of timeline for this. I just want to know where we're at for this.
There are a number of things that we have to do first. The first thing is, as I said, over the next 3 to 4 months, is to look at the current maintenance and health and safety issues in relation to the fort. We also then have to put in place, for want of better terminology, a steering group of those interests in the fort. So whether that's local community group, the council, Natural England, Historic England, all have an interest. So we bring those together. But certainly over the next 6 to 12 months is when we anticipate looking at that. But again, that will be subject to cost and funding and IRP priorities and so on.
Can I go to Councillor Kent next?
Yeah, can I just pick up on that response? Mr. McLeave said that a steering group which will include local community. We read the report. Key partners to form new steering group: Thurrock Council, Thurrock Council, Sailor, Historic England, National Highways. Local community isn't there. So, you know, I would like that amended if that's the case. We talk about operating models that would include a local community group, a local community bid. You know, I've got to say, revisiting the conversation on the Thames side, it's now 20 months since we first said, let's look at a community bid to run the Thames side. I don't want to be sitting here in another 20 months, just wondering what's going to happen with Coalhouse Fault. And we kind of go again in that in the feasibility section of the action plan. Identify preferred option, including governance arrangements, appraise proposals from local community groups, but nowhere in the report does it say that we will talk to community groups or encourage them to come forward with bids. So what's the plan for encouraging community groups to come forward with bids on this kind of timescale?
So a couple of points on that, Councillor. We have already received bids from a number of different groups that will be assessed as part of this process. And in relation to the steering group, the examples are given are exactly that. I certainly would anticipate a wider group as part of a co-design and co-production. I'm thinking about the fort and its longer term use. But as I say, as we go through the feasibility study and the different options, we will consider the existing proposals and others that may come forward from whether that's private individuals or other groups.
So without getting bogged down in process, you've already got bids from some interested community groups interested in taking on Coalhouse Fault before you've advertised that there is any kind of opportunity. So what will you do now to advertise that opportunity and make sure there's some sort of level playing field?
Well, certainly the groups that have come forward represent a whole range of different interests from the wider community. As part of that, we will connect with local community groups and local forums, as well as part of the development of the cultural strategy, which we will bring forward. Again, there are opportunities as part of that action planning and the consultation and engagement process for different activities, including the redevelopment of Coalhouse Fort. So it won't be just one process of those groups that we currently have. It's a wider consultation exercise linked into the new cultural strategy.
But if there is an opportunity to take on a council-owned asset, then surely there has to be some sort of, I don't want to call it a procurement process because it isn't, but there has to be some kind of proper process that means that all interested parties are given the same opportunity to get involved and to have their bid assessed, surely.
I agree, and that's a process that we would have to develop as part of the wider feasibility on what the future use of the fort might be.
Just going, before I come to Councillor Arnold, just going on what Councillor Carter and Councillor Kent, I think that the message is going to come quite clear from the committee, hopefully, that we want some deadlines and milestones in place for Coalhouse Fort, just so it's not open-ended, and whether it's, you know, the bids have got to be in by such and such a date, the feasibility studies by such and such a date, even if it's, you know, it's something to aim for, and then we can hopefully keep things on track. Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just very quickly, just coming back to some of the talked about with Councillor Carter, the health and safety assessment. What happens if that actually, just theoretically, if that comes back and it maybe sort of costs are sort of insurmountable or make it kind of unviable? I mean, what actually happens then?
That's something we'll have to assess at that particular point. We'll also then probably have to look at other potential funding opportunities, for example, that might be available to us to be able to fix those health and safety issues. As I've mentioned, there are a wide range of interests from Natural and Historic England, LTC and others. So again, there may be opportunities to look at funding from other sources if they are identified.
Yeah, I was going to say hello. Actually, I think it's the first time we've actually spoken properly, isn't it? I was going to say that first. Yeah, and then really just something else, really. I mean, I think it's just the over-ambitious me, really. I mean, I was just thinking. I mean, it's a fantastic a venue, isn't it? I mean, it's a fantastic place to visit, isn't it? And I was wondering if you ever had any other interest from maybe a larger organisation or whatever, you know, to actually take on the fort as a much bigger attraction. Do you see what I mean? You know, I mean, because it offers so much. There is so much down there, isn't there? And it is a fantastic place to be by the river and everything. Do we ever get people come approach us with regards to taking the whole thing on as a much larger attraction? Let me just sum it up like that.
We do, and we have done so. In addition to the interest from the local community groups, we have also had interest from private individuals who have expressed an interest in that sort of thing. But again, all of that will be part of that wider assessment of options as part of the feasibility.
Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, you said earlier, obviously, about the Coalhouse Fort, redevelopment. What redevelopment does it need?
At the fort? Yeah. It may need no redevelopment in terms of, you know, completely changing or amending it. As I said, the first thing that we're looking at is the health and safety requirements. The second thing is then what potential use the fort might have going forward in terms of maximising the use of the heritage asset and bringing it back into use. Depending on what that future use might be, there may be some redevelopment that's required, but again, we don't know that until we go through the process of looking at the feasibility and the options connected with it.
Do the members of the committee feel it may be useful to just get like a monthly update via email to the committee members on Coalhouse Fort? Councillor Arnold?
Yeah, I would find that quite interesting. Actually, it's an area I've not really sort of touched into, although I've visited it over the years many times. But I've never actually got into the nitty gritty of the building itself, you know, and the actual sort of what goes on behind. So I would be very interested in that. Yeah.
Happy to do that, Chair.
Look around, any other members wish to make a comment? No. Thank you very much for bringing the report to us. It's, I think it's been too long. I just wanted to see some traction around it. So yeah, moving to the recommendations for this. 1.1, note the current position relating to Coalhouse Fort. We've done that. First agreed. 1.2, note the proposed approach and next steps for Coalhouse Fort. If I could come in, would it be possible to have a regular update for the members so we could choose when maybe it needs to come back to a committee or a relevant committee? Thank you. And 1.3, notes further updates provided as key tasks of action. Well, I think we've just covered that one off as well. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gerard. Thank you very much for officers for tonight for your reports. It's been quite a long meeting. Moving on to the work programme. Work programme on pages 51 to 53. Do members have anything to add to the work programme? Please note this is the last meeting of the municipal year, so any suggested reports will be added to the work programme for 2023/24. Last scheduled meeting. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Anything to add from members? No. Thank you very much. With that, thank you everyone. This concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 21:27 p.m. Drive safely. Thank you everyone.